Well, here we are, the day after Senator Ted Cruz of Texas was booed by the convention crowd with cries of "Get over it, Ted," ringing throughout Cleveland. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to reach back to a somewhat similar situation that developed during the primary with this Republican, Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts. His parents, Ameritrade founders and billionaire anti-Trump business couple Joe and Marlene Ricketts, donated about $4 million to an anti-Trump super PAC. But Governor Ricketts told me exclusively 3 months ago that no matter what, he would get behind whoever the nominee is to take the White House, even though Donald Trump had insulted his parents just as Trump had insulted Ted Cruz's wife and father. Governor Pete Ricketts joins me live once again. Okay, Governor, just to be sure, even though Trump had issued sort of veiled threats against your folks back in February, will you vote for Donald Trump for president?
Yes, I will be voting for Donald Trump. You know, I went through a very contested Republican primary myself, and the day after that primary, every one of my opponents was at a unity rally to support me, and that's what we have to do as Republicans, is come together to support our nominee.
Well, I agree. With the feeling that you have, do you understand, though, why Ted Cruz did what he did last night? Because he's getting really criticized for that.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, I have nothing but admiration for Senator Cruz. I think he's a wonderful part of our party. But again, I go back to my experience, and when you think about your choice, you've got a choice between Donald Trump and Mike Pence or Hillary Clinton. And the choice couldn't be more clear about who is going to take our country in the right direction, and that's Donald Trump.
All right. I want to talk about a couple of things here. Governor John Kasich is also getting criticized, with more people saying, get over it. You're a governor yourself. If this situation were similar and you really disagreed with the principles of the front runner, because John Kasich disagrees with the principles of Donald Trump, would you be behaving the same way? I mean, what do you have to say about that? Have you talked to Governor Kasich?
You know, I actually haven't talked with Governor Kasich, and I certainly, again, can understand where he's coming from. As when I went through my primary, it was a very tough primary. And, you know, we had President Obama come to Nebraska, and it was a challenge for me to rearrange my schedule, but ultimately I ended up going to greet him at the airport. I certainly disagree with many of his policies. So, again, I think that as Republicans, we have to come together. The primary is over. We got to get behind our nominee.
Okay. One of the policies I'm wondering if you would disagree with Donald Trump on might be trade, because China is Nebraska's top import partner. Donald Trump has called for, as you know, somewhat onerous taxes or at least tariffs on China. Anything coming in, because he says we need fairer trade. If you had his ear, what would you say to him about that? Because you guys have a good relationship with the Chinese.
Well, as a matter of fact, actually, I think it's more Canada and Mexico are our top trade partners, but China is number 5 and growing fast.
Right.
And actually, I've had this conversation with Donald Trump when he was in Omaha a couple of months ago, right after he became the presumptive nominee, and said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about trade. And he was very open to the conversations. I talked about how important trade was to Nebraska and creating job opportunities and how we need to knock down those tariffs.
And how'd that go over?
And he was very open to those conversations. You know, he was very open to those conversations. In fact, the comments that we had prior to him going to speak to the media or speaking at the rally, he actually incorporated some of those in his remarks.
You know, you host the nation's largest shareholder meeting. That would be Berkshire Hathaway, based in Omaha, Nebraska, Warren Buffett's company. Business really matters. You've got a businessman at the top of the ticket. What would you love to hear from him tonight as Donald Trump gets on that stage?
Well, I would love to hear him talk about how he's going to bring his private sector experience to changing how things in Washington are run, how he's going to hold people accountable to get better results. And, of course, if you combine that with Mike Pence, who is the best choice he could have made for vice president, Mike brings that perspective of not only being in Washington, D.C., but being a governor in a state, and I might be biased, but that will allow him to see how those Washington policies will really play out in the states where they impact people's lives. So I think we've got a great ticket, and tonight it's up to Donald Trump to really lay that out for the American people. You,
as a Republican, have managed to work well with the Democrats in Nebraska. Do you foresee that? Do you hope to see that crossing of the aisles a la Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill in this administration if it were come to pass that Donald Trump becomes president?
Well, I think that's one of the things that really highlights successful executives is that, you know, after the campaigns are over, you have to go back and establish relationships, start working with people on both sides of the aisle. And certainly that's one of the things that I would expect as Donald Trump to do as a business person, to really not be caught up in all the politics, but understand who he needs to work with to be able to make things happen.
Good to see you, Governor. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Liz.